Welcome back to the Collaborative IEP podcast. I'm Ashley Barlow, your host, and I am so happy you are here. Oh man, I am modeling normalizing support. So I'm pretty sure I have a frozen shoulder. I am likely going to like the next person to get it actually diagnosed because what I have been doing is not working. And so I had a doctor's appointment scheduled next week anyway with somebody that I think can just say, yes, that's a frozen shoulder and write me the PT prescription. But anyway, I'm just like attached to a heating pad. So if you watch on YouTube, it would be hard to ignore the fact that I am attached to a heating pad. If anybody's ever had a frozen shoulder, I would love to hear from you. Mm, I have some exercises. I have some things that I am doing. I have been to one medical professional about something else who was like, "Yeah, that's a frozen shoulder." And my massage therapist said the same thing. So that's what's happening here. I'm really uncomfortable and it like creeps up my neck. So earlier this week, you know how your back will go out? My shoulder like went out. I mean, not my shoulder, my neck. Like I had a just like seizure of not seizure. I had like my muscles seized up, and so my neck like just was completely uncomfortable. Um so anyway, if you watch on YouTube, that's what's going on. I feel like there's always some kind of explanation to something in the background or something that's happening, and I do like to call attention to it because I model this perfectly imperfect thing. I kind of almost feel like it's an accusation. People oftentimes think that I have it all together, which is hilarious to me because I don't. Literally yesterday at Jack's therapy appointment, I pulled out my wallet and like a wrapper to a gas station granola bar came out. And I was like, this is just how it goes in our house. And B, I get a lot of shit done. And I do, I like, I'm not, that is not an accusation because I do get a lot of shit done. But the way I do it is this like perfectly imperfect. Well, okay, guess what? I have to report a podcast. And if I don't do it with the heating pad, I won't be able to do anything the rest of the day. And so that's what we do. So hopefully I can be a model to you of those things. All right. So our theme kind of right now is negotiation strategy. And like I said, we're going kind of back to our roots. We're going back to our roots for a lot of reasons, but mainly because as I worked to revamp the membership and continue to do that, I went through all of the presentations I have ever given at Ashley Barlow Company, which turned into this business, the Collaborative IEP. And I was like, and I did that simultaneously, as you know, to a time period where I'm having to advocate a little bit more for Jack. And as you know, I'm leaving it there, but it, I'm kind of like walking the walk as I am teaching this to you guys. And, that always gives me better insight into how you guys are feeling, how you're navigating various like twists and turns of advocacy. And don't forget, advocacy doesn't always just happen at school. It happens in your community, in your neighborhood, in your family, at the doctor, at the bus stop, at work, on the cheerleading team, all of the places. That those are the things that I could think of that I talked to clients about yesterday. And so I kind of like came back to this realization, to a few realizations in doing that. And one was we got to go back to those three things that we need to advocate effectively at school. And that is knowledge of special education law, knowledge of special education practice, which if you've listened to the last few episodes, I've said this and I'm going to say it again. I feel like we focus a lot on that reading strategy, supports for executive functioning. I have OTs come in, I have PTs come in, I have BCBAs come in, and we talk about that because there's a huge content gap there for parents. Like, there's so much to know about your child's profile, and that's hard. So we spent a whole lot of time doing that. But the 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 reason that I started this business is the third prong, and that is the advocacy and negotiation, compromise, mediation, alternative dispute resolution strategies to get your child what you think they deserve in that second prong under the shadow of the law. The first prong, I am going to be pulling thread off of this sweater all day. I sewed a little bit last night in this sweater, and this is my chair sweater, the one that goes on the chair and then comes back out. And so I'm going to have little pieces of thread everywhere. So as I looked back into kind of the history of where we started, I had this presentation that was called Seven Simple Solutions to Solve Your Sticky IEP Situations. And I remember I wrote this in my bed. I when I started this business, I was working 70 hours a week as an attorney. And it was 2020. Jack was home full time. He was not at school, nor was Griffin. Griffin was a middle schooler. Jack was in third grade. Jack's now a freshman and Griffin's in college. And I was like, what can I teach the people? The way this was kind of born, by the way, was I was putting tips and tricks as I was educating Jack. I was putting tips and tricks by way of video on my website. Griffin would like put a little intro in, and eventually like we got a little more sophisticated. Like he figured out how to grab my logo off of something, and then that like spun into a video, and he and I kind of had some fun doing it. And then I quickly started doing like little 2-minute videos on here's what you can say to your teachers at school. Here's how you can ask for work to be given to your child. Here's what the Federal Department of Ed said about COVID. And so I was like, oh, this is helping people. Let me see if I can help more people. And that's how we started the Collaborative IEP. But all throughout that, the successful and different spin that I put on advocacy is this focus on collaboration. It is this kind of like relentless optimism. And so I want to say a word about relentless optimism, but I'm going to use self control. And so that is what has, kind of birthed this business. And we've had little grooves. And I felt like we were in a groove where we were talking more about the second prong, talking more about like disability, impact of disability, things to support our kids. But as I walk through this, advocating for Jack, I'm like, gosh, I need to go back and read negotiation strategy again. And I will also say this very, very loud and clear. It is very, very, very difficult to do for your kid. And I have a business that's built on DIYing it. And it is indeed very, very difficult to DIY it. And the only way to successfully DIY it is to come back and to be a student of negotiation strategy. And so that's why we're here. All right. That was 9 minutes of why we're here. Last week I did it in 12, so we're getting faster. But I really think that background is important. I really think that it's helpful for you to know that I think it is hard to do for yourself, and that I also am relentlessly optimistic that you can, right? Now, that is not to say that I don't think it is important to hire an attorney or advocate, and maybe we'll do an episode on that in the next little bit, because obviously I think that's important. That's my full-time gig. And I do advocacy services here, as you know. So, all right. So when I did this presentation, 7 simple solutions to sticky IEP situations, that was my very first thing. I started off with, like, free webinars, and that was my very first free webinar. And I was like, I remembered that it was really, really good. The workbook is really detailed. It's really long. It was probably way too long for a free webinar, but, I was trying to garner interest. And so I opened it a couple of weeks ago because I was like, what is this? And it's really good. So we're going to take some of the things from that presentation and talk about them. And today, what we're going to talk about is actually my first tip. So the first situation is what to do, the sticky IEP situation, so to speak. That's how this is broken into. It's broken into 7 sticky IEP situations. And then I gave 7 simple solutions. But we're going to talk about more simple solutions for this issue. So this issue is bullying. And the way I described it way back when, 6 years ago, was the school staff tries to tell you how it is. Now, I see this on the daily. Every single day I am either in a meeting or at the very least, I am either in a meeting, I am talking to one of my retainer clients about, like, we call them quick and dirty, like 1 hour consults. What's going on at school? What did you say? What did they say? What did you say? What did they say? I am talking to another attorney, like a school attorney, on behalf of a client. I am talking to a client themselves. I am talking to someone that is intended to help a person. So I am talking to a client's tutor or therapist or, you know, outside support person of some sort. And in those conversations, almost daily, there is a situation where a school team is trying to tell somebody how it is. Like the term, I don't really love the term mansplaining, but that's what they're doing. They get like all high and mighty and self-righteous and they say, well, this is how it's done. Well, we do this curriculum, like, aren't we so lucky that this school, 100% of people at this school are trained in Norton Gillingham? Or, well, we all do that. So this kid doesn't need it anymore. Or that's not what shutdowns look like at school. This is what they look like. Or, well, the state says we have to do this. Okay. And I mean, those are just the things I heard yesterday. Like, honest to Pete, those are the things I heard yesterday. I also heard, hey, let me see what I can do. I mean, I also heard that, right? So, but these are the kinds of issues that come up on the regular. And it's really hard for parents. I want to start off and say it's really hard for parents. And one of the reasons that it's so hard for parents is, okay, how do I know? How do I know any different? How do I know that when you say we're all certified to teach Orton Gillingham, how do I know that the verb certified is very likely to be untrue? Because certified, as it applies to Orton Gillingham, requires, like, I don't know, 30 or 100 or a large ass number of hours of practicum. Certified is almost definitely untrue as it applies to Orton Gillingham. Trained, yes. Certified, probably not. How do I know as a parent that quote unquote Orton Gillingham is oftentimes, like, not correctly quoted? How do I know the questions to ask to determine if Orton Gillingham's good? Even if I listen to the Sold a Story podcast on science of reading and the reading wars from the 1980s, which, if you haven't done that, I highly recommend that you do. I still couldn't spout off all of the questions to get to the heart of the matter, to be like, are you actually using something that is evidence-based to teach my kid how to read, And that's really, really hard. There is a humongous, humongous learning gap. So when schools pull this, like, self-righteous, all-knowing, we know more than you kind of stuff, It's kind of organic and natural, honestly. Like, yes, that's true. You do know more than me. And what's the problem with it? Like, okay, this whole system is built on an imbalance of power, which is why we have parent rights. And so, like, what's the problem in asking for questions, right? Asking questions in order to get more information. Yet somehow, when parents ask questions and ask for information, schools feel very defensive. And it's like, why do we all have to be so defensive, right? Okay. So, the first strategy that I taught relative to this was trying to take things back to objectivity. So my number one is ask for information, right? If they're talking about a curriculum, if they're like, this curriculum is so great, it's gonna blah, blah, blah. Well, cool. Show me. May I please have blah, 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 and blah about the curriculum, right? So if it's Orton Gillingham, then go back to a podcast for me, listen to the criteria for Orton Gillingham. You know, it's systemic, it's structured, it's multisensory, it's all these things. Or ask ChatGPT and then go research that. Like, never just trust ChatGPT, but believe me when I tell you, if you talk to it about special education and advocacy enough, it will start to do a pretty good job. And then you can like tease it out from there. I use it almost daily to get me started on something. Yesterday, I want to speak at more conferences, and yesterday, Brandon and I sat and we had two different prompts at dinner, and we made a list of conferences that, and it like was hitting the 2026 conferences. One thing it couldn't do was give me the speaker submission deadlines. And I wish I could, because that is really kind of a pain. But at least I have a list now to go to websites to then see when the proposals are due. And so that's super helpful, right? So ask ChatGPT, go back and podcast, look in your books, talk to people in your community, and get objective data. And then go to school and say, may I please have this? If it's about a curriculum, may I please have the scope and sequence? Where is my child in the scope and sequence? How is my child doing on the weekly assessments? Those kinds of things, you're taking it back to objectivity, right? If it is something I hear a lot is, well, that's what we do for everybody. You might really find that it is quite helpful to do an open records request. So there are laws like the Freedom of Information Act, Sunshine Acts, those types of things. That freedom of information, you'll oftentimes heard, we use the acronym FOIA. And so you can FOIA records as long as a school system has already prepared the document, then you can ask for it. They don't have, in other words, they don't have to prepare something in order to turn it over in a FOIA request. But if it exists there, they have to give it to you if it isn't confidential. So, like, you can't ask for much out of a staff person's file, but it's not confidential to get the certificate from the training that the staff person had, right? So, you can say, may I please have that policy? May I please have that curriculum? May I please have the certificate from the training? May I please have documentation that you have to substantiate that every person in this elementary school or this high school or this whatever is trained in trauma informed practice or CPI or, whatever it is, right? And that can be very helpful to you. I don't really know what you're gonna use, how you would use that information. Like, what are you gonna say? No, they aren't. Like, let's come back. But it actually does bring you back to objectivity. When you can come back to actual facts, and especially when they're facts that you can then interpret to make decisions about the skills and strategies and supports that are going to benefit a child, then you're getting someplace. Then you're getting to that objective spot, right? So, step number one is bring it back to objectivity. Step number two, this is one of my most popular podcasts, and the podcast is called How to Get More Out of an IEP, I think, but it's do the IEP in order. So when you do an IEP, you start with the present levels, and then you build the goals off of the present levels, and then you scoop up all the needs that are in the present levels and you capitalize on the strengths that are listed in the present levels and you pick curricula and skills and strategies and supports and you design specially designed instruction to teach kids the skills that they need to achieve their goals, and that's called specially designed instruction. So then you build that, and then you work your way through a transition in that step, and you get to the supports that the kid needs, the supplementary aids and services, and then that leads to educational placement, least restrictive environment. And I skipped some other. Oh my gosh, I didn't put my rings on after I put on lotion. I never do that. So, do you like these little ADHD moments about thread and rings and heating pads? I'm sorry. If you don't like them, then you're just gonna have to fast forward or, go find yourself another podcast because I am beautifully me, and this is the way it's gonna go. Okay. So, what you are going to uh, where were we? Oh, man, I did it to myself. We're playing this. Rachel, don't edit this out. This is important. This is modeling menopause and all of its impacts. Oh, crap. Good gravy. I actually had to stop and go back and look at the end of that clip, and I have been sitting here the entire time. That's how distracted I got. So, we were talking about building the IEP in order, right? And so when you build the IEP in order, what you do is you kind of look at what you're looking for, right? Like if you want an inclusive IEP, maybe a strategy is to have less specially designed instruction, or maybe a strategy is to draft goals that have to be implemented in the general education classroom. Maybe a strategy is to use the present levels to substantiate the need for i- i- natural supports in the general education classroom, like social supports, etc. And so, what we do is we take that information, which is very, very objective, and then that leads into the goals, and then that leads into the supports that you get, which then leads into the least restrictive environment and the educational placement, right? So if you go in order in the IEP and you build it such that, oh, okay, and you build it such that it can uh, support itself from beginning to end, then you are more likely to get whatever it is that you want in the IEP. Okay. And I go into that in a lot more detail in that episode. The last thing is it kind of comes back into this objectivity. But sometimes it's hard to say what you want to say as a parent because emotions come in because you don't do this as a job, because you have so much to talk about, because school controls the process and the order and the vibe of the room. And so you're like, you kind of constantly feel like you're on your heels. And I get that. And when I come in to help families, they're like, that went so well. And I'm like, if I could quantify for you all of the things that bringing me in does to, like, the vibe and the communication and the skill level and the sophistication of the conversation and all of those things, I totally would. But you just witnessed it. And so I don't have to quantify it for you. Right. So the same, you can start to chip away at that by bringing in things like little video clips of your kid, vlogs, like true, if you're trying to plan something where your child is misunderstood, then do like little interviews with your child, do little clips of them working on something consistently. If you're trying to show that your kid has the gross motor skills to not go to adaptive PE anymore, they have to earn their way into PE. Well, swallow that pill. They have to earn their way into it. And show them, doing their PT exercises at home and playing soccer in the little county soccer league and passing out papers at church school and those kinds of things. Sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words, and that takes it back to the objectivity. So another way you can do that is research. So you can take in research on, whatever it is that you want to talk about. And those are those second prong things, right? Like the teaching practices or the educational theories. So like take in research on inclusion, take in research on Orton Gillingham science of reading, take in quotes. Like I personally, Ashley Barlow, listened to the Soul to Story podcast twice. I listened to it one time on a plane to LA when it the second time. And I literally outlined it because I was like, there are so many good quotes in here. There is so much good information in here. I haven't used it in years, but I knew it would be helpful, right? So, okay, those are three strategies that you can use when you feel like the school team is telling you how it is, which I colloquially interpret as semi bullying you. I hope that's helpful. I will see you next week. Same time, same place.